After 20 years of abandonment, the Stewart siblings believed they had moved on. Bound by the hard work of their late father, they found peace in the house he built with his own sacrifice. But everything changes with a sudden knock at the door. Gloria Stewart, the mother who left them behind, has returned demanding her share of the inheritance. Now she's ready to destroy everything they built to get rich and take revenge. But how far is she willing to go? Want to know what happened? Watch until the end and don't miss this story full of emotions and unexpected twists. Also, tell us where you're watching from, comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories like this. The night Gloria Stewart left was burned into Armando's memory like a scar that refused to fade. He was only 14, but he could still see every detail with aching clarity. The way the wind howled against the windows, how his younger siblings cried softly in the next room, and the hollow sound of his father's footsteps pacing the kitchen. Donald Stewart, a rugged construction worker with hands calloused from years of labor, sat at the table, staring at the faded wedding photo. The once bright smile on Gloria's face now seemed tainted with betrayal. Armando didn't understand why his mother was leaving. All he knew was that she had packed her bags while his father was at work, pulling clothes from the closet with an urgency that made his stomach twist. When Donald finally confronted her, his voice broke. "Gloria, what are you doing? The kids—" She didn't look at him. Instead, she zipped the suitcase and straightened her blouse. "I can't do this anymore, Don. I'm tired of being trapped. I need to live for myself for once." "Trapped?" His voice was a mixture of pain and disbelief. "We're a family. You can't just walk away." But she did. Gloria glanced at Armando just once before pushing past him, her perfume lingering. Like a ghost in the hallway. Armando wanted to shout, to beg her to stay, but his throat tightened until he couldn't breathe. Laura, only 12, appeared in the doorway, holding Emily's hand, her eyes wide and confused. Michael peeked out from behind her, his small hands gripping the doorframe. "Mom?" Emily whispered, but Gloria was already gone, the screen door slamming shut behind her. The sound echoed through the house like a final resounding blow. Donald sank into a chair, rubbing his hands over his face, shoulders trembling. Armando, heart pounding, knelt by his father and tried to hold back his own tears. He had to be strong now. He was the oldest. It was his job to protect his siblings. After that night, Donald became a different man. The laughter that once filled the house was replaced with long, silent evenings and the clinking of bottles after the kids went to bed. Armando took on more responsibility, helping his siblings with homework, cooking meals that barely passed as edible, and cleaning the house as best he could. Laura grew quieter, her once bright spirit dimming. Michael's jokes became forced, and Emily, sweet little Emily, clung to Armando like he was her lifeline. They grew up fast in the aftermath of abandonment. And as the years passed, the pain turned into a dull ache, buried under layers of resilience and duty. Armando promised himself he would never let his siblings feel that kind of loss again. The years crawled by, each one leaving its mark on the Stewart family like the relentless erosion of stone by rain. Donald Stewart never fully recovered from Gloria's abandonment, but he pressed forward, his devotion to his children burning fiercer than the betrayal that haunted him. His hands grew calloused and scarred from countless days at the construction site, each drop of sweat another thread woven into the house he built for his family. Armando stepped into adulthood far sooner than anyone should. At 14, he began picking up part-time jobs and learning how to repair things around the house to ease his father's burden. As the years went by, his role as protector solidified, his shoulders growing strong enough to carry the weight his father couldn't always bear. Laura became the family's meticulous planner, her sharp mind organizing their finances with a precision that went beyond her years. Michael's humor faded, but he channeled his energy into small jobs around the neighborhood, cutting grass, fixing fences, whatever it took to contribute. And Emily, the youngest, threw herself into baking, turning flour and sugar into something magical, something that momentarily made the world feel warm and safe. But Donald's health was deteriorating. His persistent coughing, shortness of breath, and sudden bouts of dizziness were becoming more frequent. Armando noticed the way his father's hands would shake when he tried to lift heavy tools, his knuckles white from the strain. He begged him to rest, to see a doctor, but Donald was stubborn. "There's no time for doctors," Donald would grumble, wiping sweat from his brow. "This house needs to be finished. You kids need something. Solid. Something no one can take away." He kept working, his determination burning brighter than his own well-being. And then, one afternoon, it all came crashing down. Donald was up on a ladder, hammering shingles onto the roof. The sun was brutal, its heat pressing down like a weight. His co-workers would later say he looked pale, his breaths coming fast and shallow. But Donald pushed through, his gaze fixed on the unfinished corner of the roof that had taunted him for weeks. Then, without warning, his chest tightened. The pain was sharp and unforgiving, spreading through his arm and up into his jaw. His vision blurred, the hammer slipping from his fingers and clattering against the ground below. Donald collapsed, his body crumpling on the roof's edge before rolling off and crashing into the dirt. His co-workers rushed to him, their shouts echoing through the air. Someone called an ambulance, but Donald's eyes were already glazed over, his body still. His heart had given out before help could even arrive. Armando received the call at work. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm, as if the person delivering the news had done it 100 times before. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. The siblings gathered at the hospital, their grief raw and uncontainable. Armando clenched his fists, his tears mixing with anger and guilt. Laura sobbed into her hands, her composure shattered. Michael stared at the floor, his face pale and expressionless. And Emily crumbled into Armando's arms, her small frame trembling. Donald was gone, taken not by time but by the very labor he had poured his life into. His sacrifice was complete. The funeral was a quiet affair, their father's casket lowered into the earth on a cold, grey morning. As they stood by the grave, Armando made a vow to finish the house, to protect his family, and to never ever forgive the woman who left them behind. 6 months later, when their grief had only just begun to scab over, a knock on the door would rip it all open again. 6 months had passed since Donald's death. The pain of losing him was still raw, but the Stewart siblings were determined to honor their father's memory by keeping the family together. They gathered at the house Donald had built, his old photograph resting on the dining table, its frame polished but worn from years of loving care. Armando had taken the lead in managing the house, his job as a police officer giving him a strong sense of duty. Laura, now a meticulous accountant, handled all the paperwork, ensuring the house was paid off and their finances were in order. Michael, who had grown into a small business owner, spent his time fixing up the place, determined to complete the little details their father never managed to finish. Emily, ever the heart of the family, baked a fresh batch of her famous cinnamon rolls to commemorate their father's birthday, an attempt to lighten the heavy atmosphere. As the scent of cinnamon filled the house, they sat around the table, reminiscing about their father's dedication and stubbornness. "You know, he used to yell at me for using the wrong nails on the porch railing," Michael said with a chuckle, wiping at his eyes before anyone could see. "He was so obsessed with getting every detail right." "That's because he wanted it to last," Laura replied, her voice soft. "He wanted it to be perfect for us." Just as Emily brought over a plate of warm rolls, a sudden loud knock echoed through the house. The siblings froze, exchanging wary glances. No one was expecting visitors. "I'll get it," Armando said, his instincts kicking in. As he approached the door, his heart pounded unreasonably fast, as if some part of him already knew what was coming. He pulled open the door, and there she was. Gloria Stewart. Time seemed to warp, bending around the shock of seeing her standing there, looking nothing like the weary mother who had walked out 2 decades ago. She looked polished, elegant even, with her hair perfectly styled and expensive jewelry glinting in the evening light. A smug smile curled her lips. "Armando," she greeted smoothly, her voice almost mocking. "You look just like your father." Armando couldn't move. It was as if his body had locked up in pure disbelief. Behind him, the others had gathered, their faces paling as recognition dawned. Emily dropped the plate, shattered porcelain scattering across the floor. "What are you doing here?" Armando demanded, his voice low and dangerously controlled. Gloria arched an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Is that any way to greet your mother after all these years?" "You're not our mother," Laura snapped, stepping forward with her, hands clenched at her sides. "You abandoned us. You left Dad to die from overwork, and now you just show up like nothing happened." Gloria didn't flinch. In fact, her smile grew even colder. "According to the law, I'm still Donald's wife, which means I'm entitled to my share of everything he left behind." Armando felt a surge of anger, unlike anything he had ever experienced. "You abandoned us. You left us to fend for ourselves, and now you dare to demand a part of our lives?" "Law doesn't care about emotions," Gloria replied smoothly. "It cares about facts, and the fact is I am legally entitled to half of everything Donald left." The room fell into stunned silence. Gloria took a step inside, glancing around, with a critical eye as if appraising the value of each piece of furniture. "I'll be moving in," she announced, "until the matter is settled. After all, this is still my home." Something snapped inside Armando. He stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "Get out," he hissed. "You don't belong here." Gloria merely laughed, brushing past him as if he were nothing more than an inconvenience. "I suggest you get comfortable with the idea, son. I'm not going anywhere." The nightmare had only just begun. Gloria wasted no time making herself comfortable in the house. As if her very presence wasn't already a violation, she moved into the master bedroom without asking, discarding Donald's belongings with the careless arrogance of someone who believed herself entitled. "Better to make space," she said with a cold smile, when Armando caught her tossing their father's old jacket into a trash bag. "This place is cluttered with junk." "Those are his things," Armando snapped, his fists trembling with rage. "You don't get to touch them." Gloria shrugged. "I have every right. I'm his widow, after all." Laura tried to fight. Her with logic, spitting legal terms she'd learned from hours of online research. Michael refused to speak to Gloria altogether, instead pouring his frustration into hammering nails and repainting walls as if restoring the house could somehow erase her presence. Emily had become a ghost, her once vibrant smile extinguished. But Gloria's cruelty wasn't limited to the house. She began spreading her poison through the neighborhood, her words slipping into conversations like venom. She told neighbors that her children had turned against her, locking her out of the home she was entitled to, forcing her to fight for her own rights. "She's playing the victim," Laura said, pacing the living room with her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "People are starting to believe her." "She's a master manipulator," Michael grumbled, his voice muffled from the tools he was organizing. "Always has been. But now she's got everyone else drinking her poison." Even the local church, where Emily had once found comfort, began turning against them. Gloria had gone to the pastor, her eyes brimming with crocodile tears as she recounted a fabricated tale of how her children had banished her from her rightful home. The whispers and judgmental glances grew more common. The sympathy of those who had once supported them was fading. "Maybe we should just leave," Emily whispered one night, her eyes downcast. "Let her have the house. It's not worth this." "No," Armando replied, his voice firm. "This house is ours. It's Dad's legacy. I'm not letting her destroy what he spent his whole life building." But even his resolve was starting to crack. Gloria's presence was like a rot spreading through their lives, corroding everything Donald had fought to give them. The woman they once called mother had returned not with love or remorse, but with greed and cruelty. And now, more than ever, Armando was determined to make her pay. Desperation drove them to seek legal help. Their father's old lawyer had long since retired, so they hired Mr. Hayes, a gruff but sharp-witted man in his 60s who wore his years of experience like armor. His small office smelled of old paper and fresh coffee, and his eyes were the kind that missed nothing. "The situation is complicated," Mr. Hayes explained, his fingers steepled as he spoke. "Legally speaking, Gloria is still Donald's wife, and under state law she's entitled to her share of the marital assets. The fact that she abandoned you makes it harder, but not impossible, to fight her claim." "She left us to rot," Armando said, his voice trembling with barely restrained anger. "Doesn't that count for something?" "It does. But the law needs evidence, not just testimony. You need to prove that she truly abandoned her responsibilities as a mother and a wife." Laura nodded, her jaw clenched with determination. We have documents, bills, medical records, school forms. Everything was paid for and signed by Dad alone. That's a start, Mr. Hayes said, nodding approvingly. But you need more. Witnesses, if possible. People who knew the situation back then and can testify to her absence. The siblings spent weeks gathering every piece of evidence they could find. Old medical bills showing Donald's name as the sole guardian. School reports signed only by him. Letters from teachers noting the absence of a mother's involvement. It was a grim, exhausting task that forced them to relive their most painful memories. Mr. Hayes compiled everything into a thick file, his expression thoughtful as he reviewed the stack of papers. This will help, but Gloria's not stupid. If she's serious about this, she'll have her own strategy. And Mr. Hayes was right. Gloria wasted no time launching her counterattack. She hired a high-profile attorney known for handling messy family disputes and wasn't afraid to play dirty. She claimed that Donald had been emotionally abusive, twisting the truth into something unrecognizable. He isolated me, she told her lawyer, with a perfectly measured tremble in her voice. He controlled everything, our finances, the children. He turned them against me. Her lies stung like salt poured into fresh wounds. Hearing her try to rewrite the past as if she were the victim made Armando's blood boil. But it was her next move that truly threatened to destroy them. Gloria contacted the local news. Her interview was a performance worthy of an award. Tears streamed down her face as she recounted how her own children were trying to evict her from her rightful home. The camera crew filmed her standing on the porch of the house Donald built, her hand resting on the railing as if she had earned the right to touch it. The broadcast aired that same evening, painting the siblings as cruel, ungrateful monsters. The neighborhood's whispers grew louder. Even old friends began to avoid them, unsure of what to believe. She's poisoning everyone against us, Emily sobbed, her face buried in her hands. How are we supposed to fight this? With the truth, Armando replied, his fists clenched. And we're not backing down no matter what. The battle was just beginning. The media storm was relentless. Gloria's fabricated sob stories spread like wildfire, infecting the community with twisted sympathy for a woman who had done nothing but abandon her family. The local news segment was just the beginning. Gloria took her performance to social media, posting heartfelt messages about the pain of being a rejected mother, cast aside by her own children. The comments under her posts were brutal. Strangers condemned the siblings without hesitation, their words cruel and unforgiving. Emily stopped going to church altogether after the pastor confronted her one Sunday morning, his gentle eyes now clouded with suspicion. "Emily," I heard. "About the situation," he said, his voice laced with disappointment. "Have you really refused your mother a place to stay? That's not what we stand for here." Emily's voice cracked as she tried to explain, but the doubt in the pastor's gaze told her everything. Gloria's poison had seeped even into the sanctuary where Emily had once found peace. Michael's business began to suffer, clients cancelling orders without explanation. His reputation as a dependable handyman was tarnished by whispers of cruelty and greed. And Laura found herself increasingly distracted at work, her focus shattered by the constant barrage of hate spewed online and in person. Armando, though seemingly hardened by years of policing, was not immune to the damage. His colleagues looked at him differently, their casual conversations tainted by the scandal hovering over his head, but none of them were ready to give up. Armando doubled down on his efforts, working closely with Mr. Hayes to strengthen their case. The evidence of Gloria's abandonment was solid, but it wasn't enough to wipe away the damage she had done to their reputations. "She's trying to break us," Armando said one evening as they gathered in the kitchen, their voices low and weary. "She's making us look like villains so nobody will listen when we tell the truth." "She's winning," Emily murmured, her fingers trembling as she stirred her tea. "Everyone believes her." "Not everyone," Laura countered, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "We still have the truth on our side, and the truth will matter in court. But how long will that take?" Michael asked bitterly. "And how much more damage will she do before then?" They all knew the answer. Gloria was relentless, and if they didn't fight back, everything their father had worked for would be destroyed. "She wants a war," Armando said, his eyes blazing with determination. "So we'll give her one." The battle lines were drawn, and this time They wouldn't let Gloria tear them apart. The day of the trial arrived with a heaviness that clung to the siblings like damp clothes. The courthouse was buzzing with spectators, many of them curious neighbors eager to witness the fallout of a family torn apart. Gloria had made sure the spectacle was public. She thrived on the attention, her crocodile tears and feigned sorrow. The weapons of her twisted campaign, Armando, Laura, Michael and Emily, sat at the polished wooden table beside Mr. Hayes, their faces pale but resolute. Gloria was positioned on the opposite side, flanked by her smug, well-dressed attorney. Her expression was one of serene confidence, as if she'd already won. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The judge, a stern man with graying hair and eyes sharp as glass, took his seat. The proceedings began with Gloria's lawyer, presenting her as the grieving widow, unjustly cast aside by her children in her time of need. He painted Donald as a controlling, abusive husband who had manipulated the children against her, his voice dripping with theatrical outrage. Gloria sniffled and dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her performance immaculate. When it was Mr. Hayes's turn, his approach was calm, deliberate. He presented the evidence of abandonment, documents, receipts, medical bills, and school forms that bore only Donald's signature. The records stretched back 20 years, each piece of paper a testament to the man who had sacrificed everything for his children. Armando was the first to take the stand. His voice was steady but strained, his gaze locked on the judge as he recounted the night Gloria walked out. The abandonment, the years of struggle, the nights spent watching his father work himself to the bone just to keep them fed. She didn't. "Just leave us," Armando said, his voice tight with emotion. "She erased us. We were nothing to her. And now she's back, not for forgiveness, not for redemption, but for money." Laura spoke next, her words sharp and precise as she detailed the financial hardship their father had endured alone. Michael described his own childhood, how he had grown up too fast, working any job he could find just to help keep the house standing. But it was Emily's testimony that struck the hardest. She spoke through tears, her voice trembling but unwavering. "I spent years trying to make sense of why she left, why I wasn't good enough for her to stay. And now she's here, acting like none of that pain matters, acting like we owe her something." Mr. Hayes concluded their case with testimony from neighbors who had known Donald's struggles, people who had seen the man work himself to death to give his children a life worth living. Gloria's composure began to crumble, but her lawyer pushed back, accusing the siblings of turning their father into a martyr and twisting the truth. The court session dragged on for hours, the air thick with tension and raw emotion. Finally, the judge spoke. His voice was measured, his gaze unreadable. "I have heard enough. A decision will be made tomorrow." Court adjourned. The siblings walked out of the courthouse, their bodies drained but their spirits unbroken. No matter what happened, they had told their truth. The following morning arrived with a chill that seeped into their bones. The siblings sat together in the courthouse hallway, their faces drawn and exhausted from the endless, sleepless night, spent replaying every word spoken during the trial. The weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future pressed down on them like a boulder. When the doors to the courtroom finally opened, they filed inside, their steps heavy but steady. Gloria was already seated, her expression rigid and unreadable. For the first time there was no smugness, no triumphant glint in her eyes, only the realization that her performance might not have been enough. The judge's presence filled the room with a stern authority. His gaze swept over the courtroom, before settling on the two sides with a gravity that felt like judgment itself. "I have reviewed the evidence and testimony presented by both parties," the judge began, his voice calm and precise. "This case is not just about property or finances. It is about what is just and fair in the eyes of the law." He glanced at Gloria, his eyes hardening. "Mrs. Stewart, it is clear that you willingly abandoned your family 20 years ago. You left your husband and your children with no intention of supporting or caring for them. While the law recognizes your marriage to Mr. Donald Stewart, your claim to half of the property is severely undermined by your own actions." Gloria's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, his polished demeanor cracking as the judge continued. "However, the law also acknowledges that Mrs. Stewart is entitled to some portion of the marital assets regardless of her absence. Therefore, the court has reached a decision. The silence in the room was deafening. Emily gripped Armando's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Mrs. Stewart will receive 20% of the property's value. This amount is to be paid by the Stewart siblings within 90 days. Furthermore, Mrs. Stewart is required to vacate the premises within that same time frame. Gloria's mouth fell open, her expression a twisted blend of disbelief and fury. 20%? She sputtered. That house is worth far more than— This is not a negotiation, Mrs. Stewart, the judge interrupted firmly. You should be grateful you are receiving anything at all. The gavel came down with a finality that left the room echoing with its impact. Gloria's threats of appeal and vengeance were drowned out by the relief flooding the siblings' hearts. They left the courthouse together, their steps lighter than they had been in years. Gloria's shadow had finally been expelled from their lives. A week later, Gloria packed her belongings and left the house with nothing but bitter words and empty threats. They watched her go from the porch, her expensive car pulling away like a storm finally passing. Inside, Emily placed one of her freshly baked pies on the table. Michael repaired a creaky step that had been bothering him for weeks. Laura organized the bills with her usual precision. And Armando stood in the living room, gazing at the photograph of their father with a softness in his eyes that had been absent for so long. They sat down together for the first time in years, without the weight of their past crushing them. Glasses were raised, and Armando spoke the words that needed to be said. To Dad, for teaching us that family means fighting for those you love, and for building something no one could ever take away from us. The healing process was only beginning, but for the first time hope felt real. Hey everyone, if you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking with this emotional journey. Stories like this one remind us of the power of resilience, family, and fighting for what truly matters. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more powerful, heart-touching tales like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these stories alive. And don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Also, hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care and stay strong.